Hey there. Good evening. Thanks for checking in with me. It's Deb. And the other day, I know I told you folks that I'm reading a book. It's called David and Goliath, and it's by Malcolm Gladwell. So I'm only about half done, but you got to hear some of this stuff. Obviously, the name of the book is David and Goliath, so it speaks of like underdogs and giants, so to speak, figuratively and otherwise. And when we think about David and Goliath, we think of David as, being a small, tiny guy who didn't stand a chance up against this huge soldier, brute. And the fact of the matter is, David absolutely had the skill and everything he needed to conquer Goliath. And I learned in this book that in those times, the battles were usually very close, and that's why Goliath told David, "Come on down, come to me." But David's advantage was in his what's it called? The catapult thing that he had with a rock. And I guess if you do the physics, the way that he swung that catapult with the rock at the end, that rock flying to hit Goliath in the head would have been similar to being hit by a bullet nowadays. And he had the advantage because he didn't need to get close to Goliath, because he probably was weaker. But although they thought he was the underdog, he hit that man with a bullet, which knocked him down, probably knocked him out, might have killed him. But then David had the chance to go down and behead the giant. So it goes to show that sometimes those that we think are not going to succeed or the best or the brightest or the strongest just might be. Wrote a couple notes so I don't get mixed up. So what he talks about is having desirable difficulties. Like, for example, in this case, David had the desirable difficulty of being small, but that gave him a chance to work in another way and win. This was cool. So there's a quick kind of logic question. If you buy a ball and a bat at the store, and together they cost $1.10, but the ball costs exactly $1 more than the bat, how much does it cost for you to buy a bat all by itself? So think about it. The ball and the bat together are $1.10. The ball is exactly $1 more than the bat. So what do they both cost? Well, the answer is, of course, the ball costs $1.05 and the bat costs a nickel. A lot of people answer that wrong because it seems too simple or whatever, but what he discovered in this book, well, I don't think he discovered it in the book, but what he talks about in this book is that there were some scientists or scholars that discovered that if you write that down in plain black ink, whatever, and show it to like collegiates or whatever, scholars, students, a certain number, we'll say 50%, I don't recall exactly, but 50% will get it right, 50% will get it wrong. But if you write it in some kind of obscure font in very, very light gray ink, the folks that solve it correctly double or maybe even triple. It's because you have that desirable difficulty of not being able to see it. So you kind of realize you don't skip over it so quickly as you would if it was just in black and white. Thought that was fascinating. And that leads me to the fact that dyslexia can be argued as another desired difficulty. Of course, none of us would want our kids to have dyslexia, right? You don't want them to have trouble in school, this, that, the other. Well, he also cited some studies and such that we come to find that young kids with dyslexia tend to over adjust in other ways to make up for the dyslexia, whether they're mathematicians or music scholars or whatever. They tend to overcompensate. And there is a disproportionate number of successful entrepreneurs that are dyslexic. For example, Charles Schwab, he's dyslexic. The founder of Kinko's, which is a multi-million-dollar company, is dyslexic. Had trouble in school as a kid, couldn't read. Same thing with the founder of JetBlue. And there's a number more cited in that book. And I think that's really, really interesting. And there's a story in the book about a man named Gary Cohn. Gary grew up, I want to say, in like the 70s in Cleveland, Ohio. And was getting kicked out of school. We're talking elementary school, 6, 7, 8 years old. Was getting in trouble, getting kicked out of school, troublemaker, couldn't pass his classes. And they didn't realize at the time that it was dyslexia until later. And he said he was trying, but he couldn't get the stuff, couldn't figure it out. And then when he got a little older, he realized he was okay at math. And all his mom wanted was for him to graduate high school. And he did finally graduate high school, which was like the happiest day of her life. So this dyslexic high school graduate named Gary Cohn in Cleveland, Ohio, goes to work at like an aluminum or window company, I forget, but a factory job. And he's working there for a while. And then on a whim, he went to New York and stood outside the stock exchange, not knowing anything, knowing nothing about stocks, but he knew he was good at math. And he waited, and at the end of the day, some well-dressed guy ran out and hopped in a cab, and he said, "Hey, can I share the cab?" So this Gary Cohn guy sat in the cab on the way to LaGuardia with this high-top trader, And Gary lied and said, "Hey, I know all there is. What do you need help with? And before the end of the ride was up, the man had asked for his number and said, "I'll give you a call." Long story short, Gary studied hard at the library for the next week or so, learning everything he could about stocks. Now, mind you, this man's dyslexic. So they said if he had to read about 22 pages of this book he had, this manual, it took him a good 6 or 8 hours to do so. I'm outside. And anyway, he did it and he got the job. And now Gary Cohn is a big time stock trader. Almost flunked out of elementary school. Crazy, right? My last example kind of hits home. I don't think I've mentioned it before, but a few years ago, when my kids were 14 and 16, their father was killed on his motorcycle. It was hell. But anyway, another desirable difference that's really interesting is those of us that have lost parents before adulthood. Get this. So, this lady named Lucille Erlamonger, I may be mispronouncing it, but Lucille Erlamonger was writing a book about prime ministers. So obviously, a long time ago. And going through her stats and data and stuff, she noticed that it was odd that so many of the British prime ministers in history had lost a father. As a matter of fact, it was 67% of the prime ministers in this time bracket that she was studying lost a father before age 16. And now, obviously, this was a long time ago, so people were losing their fathers more often than they are now, but it was at least double, the general population. And they were British prime ministers, so it's odd. And so, this author, Malcolm Gladwell, looked at the United States presidents. Now, this book was published like 10 years ago or something, so he went up to President 44, Barack Obama, and come to find out that 12 of our 44 first presidents had lost a father before their adulthood, which sticks out because that's more than 25%. Now, how many of us lose a father like in the average, on the average? And it's usually about 8% because I looked it up. It's like 8%. So why is it that our kids that lose a parent before they become adults are so successful or are several times more successful than kids that don't. I mean, you'd think it'd be a disadvantage, but it's actually, in some ways, a desired difficulty. And they just found that a lot of geniuses grow up in adverse conditions. And so they need to overcompensate and maybe fight a little more or whatever it may be. And I found that really interesting. And again, I'm only half done with this book, but it's showing me that if David can beat Goliath, and this 8-year-old that's getting kicked out of school because he can't read and he has behavioral problems is now a multimillionaire at the New York Stock Exchange, you know, I don't think I have much to worry about. I think I can do something. What do you think? Let me know. Comment. And do me a favor. It's free. Just go boop. Press the subscribe. Thank you very much. Good night.